Hello and welcome to class time. I'm Vanessa Francis and I'll be guiding you through today's CSEC English language lesson. Let's begin. So far, we have been looking at narrative writing, different elements in narrative writing. So today, we're going to capture all the elements in one because we're going to analyze narrative elements. So after today's lesson, you should be able to review elements of narrative writing, discuss approaches to completing the narrative writing component of the CSEC English A exam, and of course, distinguish among the various narrative prompts in the CSEC English language exam. Now, let's review. So we have looked at characters and characterization because you cannot have a narrative without at least one character, your main character. We have different types of characters. We looked at the flat versus the dynamic. We looked at the protagonist versus the antagonist. We looked at your main and major characters versus your secondary characters, all of whom will come together to create a rich interaction in your story. We also looked at the idea of your plot, the different elements of your plot. You have your conflict, your climax, and your resolution. You need a conflict in your story, the driving force in your story, a problem that must be overcome, something to be solved. So you need to have that to push your story forward. We looked at the idea that you have different types of conflict. You have internal conflict, where your main character basically is struggling with him or herself. Your main character has thoughts, your main character has fears that they need to overcome, certain ideals that they need to reconcile with. You have various types of external conflict. You have the most popular one, man versus man. So you have your protagonist versus your antagonist, two characters facing off against each other. You have your man versus society, where it is not any one person who is going to cause the problem, but a whole issue of rules, regulations, norms, expectations held by a certain group of people. You have your man versus nature, where your character has to face off against a force of nature or something caused by a force of nature. You have various types of conflict that will have to come out in order for you to have a rich story. So think about those as we go through today's exercise. Now, of course, you're going to have to distinguish among the various narrative prompts that you will get in your exam as well. So think carefully of all of these things as we go ahead. Now, in order to be able to write stories, you need to be able to analyze stories. So I have one for you, a very interesting story. And what I find most interesting about it is the fact that it is a very ordinary situation that has been presented in a very creative way. So our story is Journey by Night, and it's written by Undine Giuseppe. He stood alone, leaning against a post, and shifting his weight from one foot to the other. It was late, and the taxi stand was empty. The street was silent. He looked up and down, hoping that some vehicle would come in sight, for he wanted to get home, but none came. The silence began to pall. He started to whistle, but there was no mirth in it, and he soon stopped. Midnight, 10 miles away from home. What was he to do? To begin to walk that distance was out of the question. A dark cloud passed across the sky, hiding the few pale stars that had been there. The noise of a falling dustbin reached his ear. Some dog must have been scattering its contents. Instinctively, his hand felt for his wallet. Yes, it was still there. If only he had a stick. But he had nothing with which he might protect himself. He began to walk up and down, up and down. What was that in the distance? At last, two headlights were drawing near. He stepped into the middle of the street and held up his hand, and the car stopped. "Taxi?" he asked. "Valencia?" "Get in," said the driver, opening the door. He sat beside the driver, glad to be on his way home at last. He had felt so lonely while he had been waiting. If only someone would say something. In the semi-darkness of the car, he turned to look at the other passengers, but no one else was there. The driver said nothing to him as the car sped along. Suppose... No, he mustn't allow himself to think of that. He glanced at the driver, and again his hand went to his wallet. He had heard of passengers being attacked at night and robbed. But surely, no, that couldn't happen to him. If only he could see the other man's face clearly. But he had no idea who the driver was. He kept his eye intently on him during the seemingly interminable journey. Now they were approaching a spot where the road branched off in another direction. There were tall, dark bushes around. The car slowed down, and the driver was looking at him. Then the driver took something short and black from the side pocket of the car. It looked like an iron tool. Would the driver attack him with that? "Stop!" he heard himself screaming, and his heart beat so fast with fear that he could hardly breathe. But the car did not stop. Faster and faster instead it went. Now they were nearing his destination. Did the driver intend to take him past and then, "Put me down here," he cried out. Still, with his eyes on the driver, he quickly stepped from the car as it came to a standstill. He fumbled in his wallet for the fare, but the taxi was no longer there. "No night passengers for me again," exclaimed the driver, as, with a sigh of relief, he hurriedly moved off, and his hand tenderly caressed the heavy spanner with which he had meant to defend himself had the queer passenger attacked him. Now, think about the different elements that came out in this story. We have two characters. They're both unnamed. So keep in mind, you don't have to name your characters. So we have two unnamed men, one a passenger, one a driver. The story started off with the passenger waiting to get home, and we got different hints about the setting. He said that it was midnight, so we know the time of day, it's midnight, dead of night, and he was 10 miles away from home. So, of course, he would be feeling a sense of desperation. He needs to get home. There are no taxis around. And then in the distance, he sees lights approaching, asks if it's a taxi. Notice the taxi driver didn't really say yes, it was a taxi, just told him to get in. And then our story really begins, and we see where the conflict is not necessarily man versus man. We're led in that direction because we're of the belief, based on what we're hearing from the main character, that he might be in danger. We think he's in danger. The writer gives us clues that he's in danger. But at the very end of the story, we get that nice twist where he was in no danger whatsoever. It was all in his mind. So it turns out that the conflict was really internal. And then at the end of the story, when we discover that he has arrived to his destination safely and the car pulls off, what do we also learn? The driver was also having an internal conflict because the driver also believed he had been in danger. So right there we have an interesting situation. This is a typical day-to-day. We get into taxis all the time. But this one put a little spin on it. So it's a mundane situation that has been created into something totally different and something interesting to read. So do not pressure yourselves into thinking that your stories have to be so grandiose. You can take simple routine things and put a creative spin on it and have a beautiful story at the end. All right? So let's get into it. Now, for the exam, what you will have in front of you on the paper is a suggested time of 45 minutes. And in that suggested time, you need to write a story with a word limit of 400 to 450 words. Now, what I need you to understand is that if you are not particularly adept at writing, the only way you're going to successfully complete this is if you continue to practice. You need to give yourselves time to develop the skill. And those of you who are fairly good at writing stories already still need to practice because you need to sharpen up the skill. We never stop learning. So you have 45 minutes as a suggested time to write a minimum of 400 words up to 450 words. The general rule is that if you go over the 450, you don't lose marks for going over the 450. What you end up losing marks for is whatever mistakes you end up making, and if you drag the story on too much, that's where the marks will come off. Not because you exceeded that word limit. That word limit is more a guide. Once your story has all the elements it needs to have, the grammar is good, you can still earn your marks, even if you go a little over the word limit. So here are some tips now to help you in the exam and preparing for the exam. Now, there's always an issue with starting the story. Many students will sit for half an hour, 20 minutes, even an hour. Miss, I don't know how to start it. Well, let's look at some possible ways you can start it. So you can start it by being dramatic. Right here, you create the situation where something exciting is happening. We did not have that kind of start in our story, but you can have a dramatic beginning. So you can start off with literally a bang. You can put the word bang on the paper, in caps, B-A-N-G, and right there, the interest is drawn because what is making this sound? Why is this sound being made? How are people going to react to it? That sort of thing. So you can start with a fight. You can start with somebody screaming out, somebody bawl out, help! So there are many dramatic ways you can start your story. So if your story is supposed to be high-pitched, high-paced, then of course start with a bang. You can start your story by being mysterious. So you can create a scenario where questions are coming in the reader's mind. So you can start it on a very subtle note. You can drop some hints. You can pull us in because we're curious. So you can pique our curiosity. Have us wondering, what is happening? What is going to happen? Why are these people sneaking about? So you can have a story start with a young man who is looking around furtively and scurrying across the road. Right there and then we know that, he's hiding something. So we get interested now. What is he hiding? Where is he going? What is he going to do? You can be authoritative. So you can just get into the story. Tell us what we need to know. And then pull us in afterwards with whatever other tidbits you have. So you just begin the story. Shane Shaw was a good man, and get into describing it. You can start by posing a question. Now, when you pose a question, the idea is your reader is going to be curious about what the answer is. So whoever knew what happened to such and such? Where did these people go? Why did that have to happen? So we can start with a question, and then the story is more or less centered around the answer to that question. And us, the readers, will be there wondering, when will the question be answered? What is going to lead us to the answer? All of that will just keep us reading to find out, to solve this mystery you have presented to us in the form of a question. Of course, you started it. Now what? You need to develop the body. You're always told what is a plot, sequence of events. But I challenge you to add this word to it, logical sequence of events. So your plot must have a logical sequence. It must follow some kind of order that makes sense. You can't have your plot skipping back and forth, and nothing ties into something else. The sequence must follow a pattern that the reader can follow, because if you're confusing your reader, then your reader will lose interest in reading. Think of your own selves. If you're watching a television program, a movie, whatever it is, and you can't follow what is going on, eventually you're either going to change the channel or turn the TV off and go lie down or do something else. So do not do that to your reader. Make sure that even if you want to use flashback or flash forward, the main sequence of events is following a logical sequence, a logical order. It makes sense how you have strung everything together. Now, this is very important. Create tension early. And after you have created the tension, don't just create it and drop it buffer ground. Create the tension. Sustain the tension throughout the story. So you introduce the problem to us. Build on that. You saw it in Journey by Night. The problem, this young man wanted to get home. He couldn't get home. He got into the taxi. You saw at the beginning, he was a little wary of getting in there. And then right throughout the story, he kept thinking of the different things that might have been going on. So the tension is sustained throughout the story. And then at the moment when we think, oh Lord, the man I go drive away with him and kill him and rob him, whatever the case may be, at that point of climax now, we learn what is really going on. So you have to create the tension, keep adding to it, add to it, build it up, build it up, build it up until you get to the highest point where we just need to know what is happening. And then you let us know. And then shortly thereafter, you die down, bring it down. No, you need to ensure that you have believable and captivating characters. Now, you cannot have a character who is too outlandish. You need characters who people can relate to, who people can understand. You need characters who, I can think of somebody like that. So if I want a hero in my story, I can pick an ordinary person to be the hero in my story. And I can do things with my hero to create that heroism. So he didn't start out saving the world. He might have started out as a simple, ordinary person going about his daily life, but he finds himself in different situations where he has to help, and that keeps building him up to becoming a hero eventually. You need captivating characters. You need characters that your readers will want to read about. So you need something about your character to pull your reader in. Everything that you're doing on the paper is to pull the reader in. So you're using all the narrative elements to pull your reader in. You want to ensure that your essay can stand apart from the hundreds of thousands of other essays on the same topic. So you need to do something special with yours. Of course, you're writing a story. Remember, you have a time limit. You also have a word limit. So you cannot afford to go into any great and long details. Certain things you have to cut short. So you don't want to be rambling too much in your story. So you don't want the extensive descriptions that don't add to the story. You don't want the extensive events that do not add to the story. You want to keep it encapsulated. You want to keep the essential parts and leave out the non-essential parts, because you don't have all day to write this story. You have 3 other sections to complete. So you need to monitor yourselves and understand that. Get the story written, but make sure you're watching the time, you're watching your word limit, and you're not stretching it out too much with the unnecessary details, descriptions, that sort of thing. Something you need to ensure you include: sensory appeal. You want to ensure that you maximize the potential behind sensory details. So you want to get the most impact out of your sights, the most impact out of the sounds, the most impact out of the smells, the feeling, the taste. Maximize that potential. So put some real effort into including sensory details and getting the most out of your sensory details. So again, you're not putting it in there just to say you have it in there. You're putting it in there for it to serve a purpose in the end. In the story, we did not have a lot of variety in sensory details, but we did get to see quite a few things. We did get to feel quite a few things. We felt certain sensations as this man was sitting there searching for his wallet, looking to the side to see if the man was doing what he's supposed to do. So get those details in there to build up the impact of your story. Now, where dialogue is concerned, the same caution applies. Don't just have dialogue to say, I use dialogue. Put the dialogue in there to serve a purpose or several purposes as the case may be. Again, you need to use the dialogue to give it a sense of realism. You want to have your characters talking to each other. In this story, the gentlemen spoke to each other in the beginning, but notice they did not speak extensively because that would have killed the whole intrigue that was going on. If they spoke too much, then no mystery would be there because they wouldn't really realize that they're each sitting there wondering what the other is going to do. So there was dialogue in the beginning so that you set up a situation where passenger, driver, but then the dialogue is cut and the other influences take over. Now your story might need more dialogue than this, but if you're going to include dialogue, make sure that the dialogue is going to push the story along. It's either going to reveal some elements of the plot to us, or it's going to show us what these characters are like, or it's going to add to the theme or add to the setting. But the dialogue has to do something. It can't just be on the page staring at us, staring at it, and that is it. No, no, no. You want to make sure you create appropriate moods because you can create moods and it's not the right mood. So in our story, we had tension and everything in the story contributed to that tension. So we couldn't have one of them just laughing or giggling or going through his phone and watching YouTube videos. No, because that would kill the whole idea of one of them being scared and unknowingly the other one is also scared. So everything in the story contributed to that tense atmosphere, that tense mood. We there wondering, is really somebody going to drive away with him and rob him? That sort of thing. So in your story, if you need the mood to be lighthearted and happy, then include elements that do that. You want to make sure that you have people laughing. You want to make sure you use bright colors. You want to make sure that there's festivities going on. So you don't want a situation where you're trying to create a happy mood and everything is sad, or vice versa. That makes very little sense. So work on building the mood that you actually want. Now, the very important thing you need to pay attention to, because it is an English exam, vary your sentence structures. So you can't always have simple sentences and that's the whole thing all throughout. You need to vary them. You need some long ones and some short ones, some complex ones, some simple ones. And also of importance, appropriate spelling, appropriate grammar. Now, of course, we need to end our story. And at this point, you don't want to drop the ball. You started off with a wonderful beginning that pulled your reader in. You had moments in the story that kept your reader reading. You don't want at the very end now to just drop us flat. So here are some possibilities for ending your story. Now, please avoid this. You don't want a long and unnecessary conclusion. So you notice at the end of the story that we read, the young man got off the taxi drove off, We heard from the taxi driver that he had been concerned. We did not need to go any further. So we didn't need to follow the young man home and have him and listen to him telling his family what happened to him while he was in the car. We didn't need to follow the driver home and hear him tell his family. We needed to end right there, at the point where we, the reader, realized that each man had been concerned about the other man. Cut right there. So you don't need any long, drawn-out conclusions. Stop where the story ends. Next thing to avoid, too many loose ends. Now, sometimes students say, but they want to end the story with a twist, or they want to end it on a little hanging note. You have to be careful. Your main conflict needs to be resolved. There must be some sort of resolution of your main conflict. So it can't be that somebody is struggling and at the end of it, we don't know if they found a way to deal with their struggle or overcome their struggle. We just see it basically continuing, same thing as in the beginning. So the beginning and the end really should not be the same. We must see where certain ends have been tied up, certain loose ends have been wrapped up nicely in a bow, and we can say, all right, this happened and this is how it went and it stopped here. So you want to end with a little high note, you want to end with a little cliffhanger, that's fine, but be careful. Do not have it that the main thing that we are reading to find out is still a mystery at the end. Now, the next thing to be careful of, the unlikely twist. So you want to have a surprise ending. Wonderful. We had a surprise ending in this story. The unlikely twist that each man was concerned about the other man. Because all along we were wondering and suspecting the taxi driver to maybe not be a real taxi driver. Maybe he's a little con artist man. Maybe he's a little thief. Maybe he's a little kidnapper. And then we find out in the end that not a thing like that went on. Each man was an innocent one. That is a good twist to have. You don't want to have a twist that is so outlandish that it throws off everything that you did before in the story. So you don't want to have a twist in this story where maybe somebody pops up out of the trunk and that person is a surprise to both men. That's kind of odd, wouldn't it? Because nowhere in the story was there anything leading up to that. So you don't want a twist that ties you up. You want a twist that ties the story together nicely, but not want to tie us up and have us wondering, where did this come from? How this makes sense? Why this had to happen? And the next thing you need to avoid, the irrelevant endings. So you have something that you add on and it really didn't need to be there. It really and truly did not contribute in any way to the story. You just put it there. Maybe you thought of it after the fact and just tacked it on there. No. When your story is finished, leave it where it is. Don't add anything more because it might very well just detract from the overall impression of your story. All right? So you want to make sure, start on a good note, maintain, 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 stop up here, and then give us a little dip so we understand what was going on. But don't bring it back all the way down to the bottom again. So here are the different types of story prompts that you're likely to encounter in the exam. So this one is on every paper basically. So it's a story based on a picture. Now with this one you need to be careful. You don't want to stick slavishly to the picture. You don't want it to end up being a case where all you do for the entire story is focus on the picture. So the entire story is built on just the picture. You have to describe every detail in the picture, every blade of grass, every feather on the bird. No, you don't want to be slavishly dedicating the story to the picture. The next thing is that you don't need to really go into many details for the extensive description of it. So you can include the picture in the story, The picture can have a purpose, but you don't necessarily have to go into it and tell us every single thing about the picture. Don't need to do that. You include it because that's the stimulus you used, but you don't have to stick to it throughout the whole story. You don't have to overdevelop the use of the picture as well. Now, the thing about the picture is that you can decide where it comes into your story. So the safe way to go is to start the story at that point. So you can use the picture as the stimulus for your story, which it is really. So you can use it as the beginning of your story. That way you won't forget to include it. Now, what I would caution you not to do is to use it and then it's like you completely go a different direction. So the picture was really saying one thing and you just talked about it for like a few sentences and then you start a different story, if you understand what I'm saying. So if you use it as the beginning of your story, what comes after should flow naturally out of it. The next thing you can do is to just include it at some point in the story. Perhaps it will be of some importance in the story. So you can start the story and lead up to the picture, have that moment, and then move on naturally. You want a natural progression and finish your story. Or the next thing you can do, the picture can be where your story ends. So depending on the picture you get, that can be the end point of your story. So you have a beautiful story, you developed your plot, developed your characters, and it naturally leads up to the picture. Notice I keep emphasizing what must happen. It must naturally lead up to that point, sorry. So here's a picture for you. Now look carefully at it. This is something many of us can relate to. So we have a group of men sitting around a makeshift table playing dominoes. This is the stimulus you got for your story. But lad, miss, this boring, sir. The true test of a writer is to take what? The mundane, the routine, the everyday, and create something beautiful. So you can look at this picture and decide what you want to focus on. You want to focus on the game itself? You want to focus on one of the characters? Do you want to focus on the setting itself? These men are sitting around enjoying a game of dominoes. They're not all playing. Some are playing. We have spectators. What are you going to do with it? Take a minute and think about it. Are you going to highlight any one player and move on from here? Is this your starting point? So one of these men on his way home, to work, wherever it is, that is where the story will take him. Is it that the course of your story will lead up to this point where these gentlemen meet up and knock some dominoes, and then when they break apart, they go on to different things? Or is this going to be the end point of your story, where after all the trials and struggles and whatever it is that you put your main character through, he now sits and enjoys a relaxing game of dominoes? You think about it. Which way is the best way for you? Here's another one for you to look at. Now we have a house, not in the best condition. And we have some trees that are blocking the house partially. Now this one lends itself to many, many different storylines. There's so many different things you can do with this. So again, are you going to start at this house and have your action take place at the house? Or are you going to start at this house and move the action away from the house? Is it that at some point in the story, your characters will interact at this house? Is it that at some point in the story, your characters need to get something from here? So this house is somewhere important for them to be? Or are you going to end your story here at the house? Now, once you are looking at these pictures, these are the things that you need to process in your mind. Do I want to start here? Do I want to just include it somewhere along the line? Or do I want my story to end up here and this is where my happy ending will take place? Is it that this house has so many bad memories for your main character that he or she is glad to be here at the end to tear it down and build something else in its place. Those are things you can think about. So your character could have been struggling to elevate themselves all this time, only to come back here to say they're going to wipe out the evidence of their failure and build evidence of their success. Now, another interesting picture to look at. So we have a young lady. Her back is to us, so we're not even sure what she looks like. And she is at the seaside. You can notice the details that there's a little bird there. Now, depending on the nature of the story you're going to create, you can ignore the bird. But depending on the story you want to create, it might be that it's the bird that you want to focus on. So perhaps your story is about this bird, not so much the woman, because you can be creative with it. Suppose it's the bird who has been transformed into a bird. Maybe it's her husband and he's under some kind of spell and he's trying to get her attention. And the poor lady, of course, not paying the bird no mind because birds are a regular thing. So she wouldn't really think anything odd for the bird to be there. So you can build those types of stories. You can use a little detail and create something unusual, create something very creative. So your story can be about the woman. Nothing wrong with that. You notice she has a violin in her hand. Is it hers? Does it belong to her? Is she a violinist? Does it belong to somebody she loves? Does it belong to somebody she hates? Those are the things you can process in your mind. Does this violin have magical powers? Is it that she is going to get rid of it because it reminds her of somebody and it's too painful for her to remember? So she's going to cast it into the sea and somewhere somebody is going to pick it up and it's going to end up coming back to her. Many different things can happen just from this one scene. So it's up to you to decide what you want to focus on, where you want to go with it, how it's going to play out. And all of this is going to require you taking a few minutes to think it through. You have to think it through. So don't just jump into the story. Yes, me like that picture here. Start and then halfway through, you don't know where to go because you didn't think it through completely. Now another one some of you might be familiar with. Now this one, we don't have anyone in the picture. But again, remember, you don't have to stick slavishly to the picture. So you're using the picture as an inspiration. Now we have a train track leading off into the horizon. So is it that somebody is going to make that journey, going away or towards something? Is it that you're going to focus on the people in the houses, on the sidelines? You have some vehicles over on the road, if you can see them over by the trees there. Are you going to pinpoint someone in one of those vehicles driving by, thinking about a goal that they need to achieve or something they need to overcome? So again, this picture is open. You can think about many different ways to create a story just from this image here. There are many different things you can do with this image that can build the story along. Somebody could be running away, and this train track basically will be their guide. So they're going to walk along the track to get to where they're running away to. It could be that they're trying to escape. So if you think about the stories of back in slavery in the US, when they had the Underground Railroad, granted, it couldn't be Underground Railroad because they have some modern vehicles on the road there, but you could put a modern spin to it. Somebody is trying to escape a hard life. Somebody is trying to escape an abusive relationship, be it parent-child or spouse. Somebody is trying to escape just life as they know it. They're probably not feeling up to anything at all. They're probably feeling as if they're failing at everything, so they need to just give up and start over somewhere else where nobody knows them. That could be what this is representing for them, a new beginning or an end to their present situation, because they're going to go off and try and get into a new surrounding. So those are stories using a pictures prompt. Now we're going to look at stories where you should include certain words. Now remember now, when you're told to include the words, you are not supposed to alter the sentences you have been given. So however it is given to you, that is how you must use it. So don't change the tense, don't change the characters' names. The exact words they gave you are the exact words you should include in your story. Now, you need to pay attention if the narrative point of view has been given, because there are cases where you might see I in there. So I did this or I saw something. So right there, you know that it's a first person narrator. You have to be the narrator. So you are not going to change it from I to he or from he to I. Be careful if it is pointing you in a particular direction for the narration portion of it. Now, what you should try to do, even though you're not marked down for it, but you should try and give the statement a little prominence in your story. So it shouldn't just have your story, oh yeah, I must write this in there, write it and then continue your story. Try and give it some sense of importance in your story. So whatever the statement is, let it be something serious. So let it be at a point of conflict. Let it be at the point of climax. Let it have some impact on your story. And of course, don't just tack it on there and leave it. That does not look nice. And that really looks as if you came with a predefined story in your mind and you just said to yourself, this is a story I'm going to write. I don't care what they tell me. And you write your story that you came into the room with and then you just put it on there and say, yes, it's finished now. Try not to do that. Let it flow seamlessly in your story. So here are some examples of what you might see. So Sikea sat quietly on the bus between the two people who said they were his parents. But something just did not feel right. And you're to write the story that includes these sentences. So right here, stop and think. There are a few ways you can interpret this. How can you think of spinning a story out of this? So you know that Sikea is a boy because the pronoun is there, his parents. So keep that in mind. So he is sitting between two people who said they were his parents. Is it that he has been lost and maybe he was in a foster home, maybe he was living on the streets, we don't know, and these two people turn up claiming to be his parents? Or is it that they're putting a little naughty twist to it where they're his actual parents, but based on how he feels about them at that point in time, he says they say they're his parents? Because face it, many of us go through those moments where our parents, in our minds, are against us. Our parents don't want us to have any fun. Our parents don't love us, that sort of thing. So in our minds, we have set up a situation where our parents are public enemy number one. Is that the same thing going on here? Is it that this little boy, or big boy, we don't know his age, it's up to you to create his age, believes that his parents are somehow against him because they don't support something that he wants to do? So here's another one now. Write a story which includes the following words. To this day, people are still unsure about what actually happened to the Henry family who lived just outside the village. Right there, we know that is some mystery. So right there at that point, your story needs to somehow tie into this mystery. Who are the Henry family? Who are the members of the Henry family? What did they do? Why is it that people are wondering about them? So you create the scenario where this mystery is going to come to light and include in there what is it that they have done that people have to be guessing about them. Now the last one, I looked in the mirror and smiled. This is it, I said to myself. If this doesn't work, nothing else will. So for this one, notice now, first person. So your story has to be told from a first person point of view. There is no option. So you now have to sit and create this scenario. What is it that you are trying to do? What plan, what scheme are you trying to develop? And this is basically your last run. If you can't get it right this time, you will never get it right. So now you have stories that should either end with or start with these particular words. So for this one, you want to ensure, again, do not alter the sentences. So whatever you're told to start or finish with, you have to use it as is. You also want to pay attention to the point of view that you're given. And you also want to know that if you're to start the story, then the story you end up writing should seamlessly flow from this beginning. And on the other hand, if you're supposed to end the story with it, then it should naturally progress to that point. So again, you don't want the sentences to be sticking out of place, looking as if they don't belong. You had a preconditioned story and you just drop the sentence in there. So here's an example now. So think about this one. Anelki paused in the entrance to the hotel. This would be the first time they would meet in almost 10 years. And you're supposed to start the story with this. And this is great because now we can go any direction you want. Who is Anelki? Who is he meeting? And why is it that they have not met in almost 10 years? Now, the obvious situation, some might be thinking maybe an ex or something like that. Try not to be too blasé. Remember, you want your story to stand out. So try and think of something more in-depth, more interesting than just meeting an ex or just meeting a long-lost friend or something like that. Think of something very intriguing that could be happening in this scenario. The other one you could use. To this day, people are still unsure about what actually happened to the Henry family. So again, we have the Henry family. You need to build up that momentum. The next one, he slammed the door behind him. He knew that it would be for the last time. Right here, your character is male. What happened to cause him to do this? Is he angry? Is he happy? What is the stimulus behind this action? So if you have to end the story now or begin the story with it, notice you have the option to either start or finish the story with it. You decide, is it best to start and move from there, or is it best to build the story and finish with this? Now you have those stories that you just are going to base it on a prompt. So you don't necessarily have to include it, but the idea brought out in the story should be reflected. So you don't have to include it, but you need to ensure that the idea comes out, and it should come out fairly clearly. And of course, you need to pay attention to what point of view you're given, if you're given a point of view. Remember, you cannot afford to change the point of view when that is not what you were given to do. So look at this one now. The music was intoxicating, yet somehow Jay felt that going into the party would be a big mistake. This turned out to be the case. So right here you have a character who had some reservations about going to a party, and unfortunately it turned out those reservations were proven true. So you're going to bring out that idea in the story. Why didn't Jay want to go? Why is it that when Jay does go, his or her fears turn out to be true? Now here's another one, and it's very open and very vague. The telephone rang and stopped, rang again, and I knew it was time. This one has the makings of a mystery. Knew it was time to do what? Is that ringing and stopping a secret code for you to go do something? And notice it says, I knew it was time. So again, you are given the perspective that you're supposed to tell the story from, first person. So you're not supposed to tell the story from a he or she or you. You're telling it from an I perspective. So the whole idea now, you need to bring out the idea of some kind of signal through this ringing and stopping. What is this signal for? What are you up to? Why you need a signal? And now, this one, not so popular in recent papers, but still, it might pop up. Stories that you get the title. So you don't want to be too literal with the title's interpretation. You want to somehow show that you have a little finesse. So if you're given a title, do not just go with the literal, the basic, base, bottom interpretation. You also want to make sure you give it a creative spin. You can have a pun, you can use irony, that sort of thing. And you also want to ensure that the title and the story relate. You don't want them to be so obscure they have nothing to do with each other. So yes, you wanted to be creative with the title, but you got so creative that the title don't make any sense anymore. Don't do that. Try not to do that. And here are some generic titles you can work with. So think about these as your homework. How can you put a creative spin on these titles? How can you interpret the dream that came true to not just be somebody did want something and it come true, or then go sleep and dream and wake up and it come true? How can the gift be not just a figurative, a literal gift, but a figurative gift? So think about those and try and build those stories. Use your imagination, use your creativity, have a wonderful time at it.